Hi, Emily. How are you?
I'm good, Gil. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for joining today. It's always great to hang.
Thanks for having me.
So, obviously, welcome to the podcast. Would love before we hop in and get started to help our audience get to know you a little bit and learn about you, your company. For those who are listening for the first time, Emily is the co-founder and CEO of HAI Analytics, and they're doing a lot of great work in the enrollment management space. So I wanted to have her on to share some of that. But Emily, I'll turn it to you as we get started. What's your story? How'd you get to where you are?
Okay, so somewhat accidentally, which I feel like is sort of how everyone gets to where they are, but I, 20 years ago, was in a PhD program in social psychology. It was very stats and research based. I knew I didn't want to go into academia, so I was looking at kind of more research focused jobs. I had never heard of enrollment management. But a friend of a friend's father was the VP of enrollment management at Syracuse University. So she suggested I talk to him, and I did, and ended up starting there as a research analyst. And I loved it. I loved the fact that I could apply my research skills in the higher ed setting because it felt like, better than sort of doing market research where I'm trying to sell Cheerios or something. You're sort of doing
True.
something
Yeah.
you feel good about. So I was there for 12 years. I eventually was the assistant VP of enrollment management and worked with the team to sort of do all the strategic admissions and financial aid planning. I built the statistical models that we use to predict yield, which is how we sort of figured out the financial aid optimization strategy. And then my husband's job took us to Massachusetts, where I'm from. So I moved and I started working at a higher ed consulting company in Massachusetts. I worked with my co-founder, and after 5 years, she and I decided that we wanted to go out on our own. We wanted to offer something that's a little bit different than what was in the market at the time in terms of helping schools use data strategically to plan admissions, financial aid, optimize financial aid, support retention, all of those types of things. So we started that 5 years ago, and here we are.
Awesome. And so, Massachusetts, for those who are not from your area, which side of Massachusetts? What's your nearest town? Are you on the Red Sox Nation bandwagon? Let's talk about. I lived in Norwood for about 4 months when I had graduated from college, doing admissions recruitment as an admissions counselor for my alma mater. So I'm very familiar with all the high schools in that area.
Yep.
What part are you from, and what's your favorite part about living there?
So I'm smack dab in the middle of the state in Amherst. My favorite part about living here, it's very, there's so much natural beauty. We live in a house surrounded by trees, and I can hear owls on a regular basis, which I love. So that's where we live. That's what I love about it. I am very much part of Red Sox Nation. I believe that anyone who isn't should be, excommunicated from the state. My husband is a Yankees fan, which is, I know it's rough. But yeah, I grew up outside of Boston, and so I like being in kind of a quieter, more rural area. And we have 5 colleges there's 3 in Amherst and there's 2 in nearby towns. So it has that very much college town vibe, which I
Awesome.
really like.
Awesome. Yeah, I live in Maine now, and I'm right over the bridge from Bowdoin College's campus, and
Mm-hmm.
we were there over the weekend for a show, and walked my son to the other side of the campus where we know there's a playground on that side. Just like walking through, you get that kind of feel for the academic vibe, especially as we're recording this, we're kind of in like move-in season and that sort of stuff. So
Yeah.
the campuses, the energy is getting back to the quote unquote normalized level. So,
Yeah.
So tell me about your. Let's go back to the beginning there a little bit. What really draws you to the numbers side of all of these things? Because it takes a certain aptitude and a certain attitude to really get into that. And I think some of that is also kind of in the naming of the company, HAI, and how that all kind of fits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the numbers, I mean, it's just something that I've always, I like to problem solve, and like particularly sort of logic problems. So having a math background and a stats background really allows you to sort of do that on a regular basis. There's certainly a lot of challenges that we deal with, and I love the challenges. I love to figure out how to solve the problems. Um, and in terms of the company, one of the things that my co-founder and I saw in our last company was that, statistics has advanced so much, and we have all of these machine learning and other AI models that we can use that are very powerful. We were hiring people out of their undergraduate careers with these incredible stats background, and they could build these, really phenomenal models. But there was sort of this change in attitude about the models that was, you just put all the data in and you let the model run and it figures it out and then, spits out the answers. And we know that that is very dangerous, that you need someone who's thinking about the data that goes into the model, who's interpreting the results that come out. So often you'll have, a spurious relationship between two variables, and that isn't clear when you're just looking at the model, but you sort of have to have the background and the expertise in the field to be able to interpret the model. So HAI stands for Human and Artificial Intelligence. And when we started, we sort of would say that we're bridging the gap between human and artificial intelligence by using those really sophisticated techniques, but also having the expertise and, really thinking about what goes into the model and how to interpret what comes out of it.
Awesome. And as you said, the company's 5 years old. So as we're in the throes of Chat GPT and the future of AI and how it's going to change everything, seems like y'all were a little ahead of the curve when it comes to that conversation, which is always great, right? I think there's important elements to that, and we'll talk in a little bit about what that that combination kind of means for enrollment management teams and how they should be adapting and evolving given all of this new-ish technology.
Grow your student community, help them stay, and encourage giving with Cadence, Higher Ed's premier engagement platform from Mongoose. Designed exclusively for higher ed by higher ed professionals, Cadence helps you engage your audiences with the perfect balance of AI and personal connection. Talk to students, parents, and alumni on their time and how they want. Empower your staff with integrated text and chat inboxes that gather all conversations in one place. Reach out to learn more about how our best-in-class service, support, and integrations have helped colleges and universities like yours have smarter conversations. From text to chat, make every message count.
But so I think that that's a very good kind of segue for us to start the conversation around the why of HAI. And you mentioned that in a lot of ways it was because you identified that there are so many I don't want to say cookie cutter approaches, but I'll say cookie cutter approaches because I'm the podcast host and I can say what I want. But it's, they're the challenge that is, the outsourcing of a lot of this work for institutions becomes a barrier in a lot of ways of progress, and also a little bit of maybe a driver of some issues and challenges. And full disclosure for our listening audience, I've been working with Emily and the team at HAI for a few months now as a consultant and a marketing advisor, and I've been extremely energized by the position that the company is taking in this space, which is why I felt it was a good opportunity to say, hey, Emily, come on the pod and help spread the word about this approach. But, I think that there's, definitely something to be said about kind of an insourced approach versus an outsourced approach. And I know you've been talking about that for years, and you know, content on your blog and all those sorts of things. What is it? Let's talk about kind of what that means to kind of insource your approach versus kind of this outsourced approach that so many institutions seem to be accustomed to.
Yep. Yeah. So when I was at Syracuse, basically we were insourcing what we were doing, and I was the person doing that. I had the research background. What we've heard from clients working in the space in the years that we've been consulting is that there sort of are two options. You can get what you refer to as a cookie cutter approach, where everyone sort of has the same variables applied and gets a grid, and the strategy doesn't look that much different from one institution to the next. Then there are very highly customized models where we've heard clients voice frustration over kind of the black box nature and not fully understanding, how is financial aid being determined. And it's such an important thing for the VP of Enrollment Management to understand and to be able to, endorse the financial aid strategy that they're using. There's something to be said for having outside expertise, for sure. Those of us who are in consulting, we talk with, a lot of different institutions, and that can be helpful. The sort of insourcing approach is the approach that I learned about first, because I was the person at Syracuse who was doing the modeling and helping with financial aid strategy. So I wasn't familiar with kind of the consultant approach. Obviously, after that, I went to a consultancy, and I became very familiar with that. One of the things that we heard from clients was that they wanted greater ownership over the process of, determining the financial aid strategy. So you sort of had two different approaches in terms of the vendors in the market. One was, what you refer to as kind of cookie cutter, where the same variables are being used for each institution. A grid is being used, and that's how financial aid gets allocated, and it doesn't differ that much from one institution to the next. So the other approach is a highly customized approach where, the awards are being determined on an individual basis, and that's certainly from an econometric point of view the way that you would truly optimize aid. But it all, we've heard from clients that it seems like it kind of happens in a black box, and they don't understand because it's a complex formula that's determining the aid. They don't fully understand or feel like they own the strategy, and it's very difficult to talk to families about it or explain, why they got the awards that they did. So, we kind of wanted to come in the middle of that, where, we are customized and every strategy differs for each institution, but we do offer sort of an easier to explain, simpler strategy. The insourcing part, we had schools, clients come to us and say, we really, because they want that ownership of the process, we want to start doing this ourselves. And we have a person, we have, someone who was like me after grad school. Mm-hmm. I had all the research background, I had the stats, but if you've never applied it in this area, it's, it's more difficult. So they kind of wanted some assistance in training their people to be able to do this in-house. So that gave us the idea to offer this service where we will work with institutions. Typically, we're doing it on a 3-year basis, where the first year, we're doing all of the work we would normally do. We're building the models, we're building the strategy, but we're working with the internal person all along to sort of explain what we're doing and why we're, doing things the way that we are. And then in the second year, it's kind of the internal person is building the models and the strategy, and we are as well. So we can look at, here's why our models look like this. And then in the third year, it's, the least involvement of us, where the internal person is really doing everything and sort of checking with us, or we're looking at what they're doing. And that's it. It's an approach I really like, and I enjoy working with the schools and the people, that we work with inside the schools to get them in a place where they can own this process. What we found is that for the most part, schools don't want to completely sever their relationship with us after the 3 years are done. They still want someone who's done this more to, be involved and kind of give the okay on everything that they're determining internally, because so much rides on enrollment, all of the revenue of the institution typically, and enrollment's influenced by aid. So, it's such an important process that there's a lot of anxiety about not getting it right, for sure.
They need a safety net, right? And to continue to have it, but it's better from an outcomes perspective. It feels like more control on the institution, less on the consultant. You're more of a guide versus the driver of the car, right? And so I think that there's philosophy around that a lot of institutions are kind of drifting towards, and you see it in other areas, right, where CRM platforms and the use of those for and the development of those has made it possible for institutions to not have to necessarily, quote unquote, outsource their student search strategy, right? Because they can do some of that work themselves using Slate or Element or whatever platform it is. And so the same kind of process is happening further down funnel, right? Where when you get to the aid strategy and predicting enrollment, that's another area where for years, like you said, it's the black box approach or the cookie cutter approach have been driving a lot of challenges. But there's, when we look at the outcomes in this space and kind of where everyone is, maybe we need to reevaluate the path that we're on, right?
Discover future applicants, delight enrolled students, and amplify fundraising performance with our Cadence engagement platform's live chat and chatbot solutions. Designed exclusively for higher ed by higher ed professionals, Cadence helps you engage your audiences with the perfect balance of AI and personal connection. We leverage proactive outreach and anticipate common roadblocks, knowing the most significant decisions often start with the smallest conversations. Our powerful AI ensures instant support and is smart enough to know exactly when to hand off to a staff member. And if nobody is available, it allows for easy follow-up. Effortlessly integrated with your website, we proudly feature an industry-leading 85% self-service rate. It's never been easier to make every message count.
So, taking a little bit of a turn, I want to take the focus back to the student perspective and family perspective here, because for the FYI podcast, we want to make sure that we also are always thinking about the student voice and the student perspective in a lot of this. And I know that there's a lot of things that you're pretty passionate about when it comes to families who might be struggling through this process. Obviously, new FAFSA coming on and how that's going to change processes, but also inform and create confusion for families sometimes. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about those issues, right? The middle class families who are coming, of college age, and how maybe this approach and process benefits them over other processes that institutions might be leveraging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that is something that I'm very passionate about in terms of we're sort of creating this situation where middle class families can't afford to send their kids to college. So a lot of schools that we work with, they have this sort of U-shaped distribution. If you look at income, where they have a lot of low-income kids who are getting federal and state aid and are able to, with institutional aid, they're able to enroll and be successful. And then at the higher end, the families that can afford it and they don't need aid, and typically they're usually getting some anyway in terms of merit aid, but it's the middle class that is really struggling. And the reason for that is the way we define sort of your need We have these federal forms and other formulas to determine a family's demonstrated financial need. The problem with the approach is the way we define need. So we have formulas that compute based on a family's income and their assets, how much they can afford to pay for college and how much the institution should give them to, lower the net cost. But need is a very soft concept. We sort of think of it as this set in stone thing, and we allocate financial aid based on it. But if you talk to families, they don't see their need as being typically what it's, especially middle class families, typically what it's calculated to be. Middle class families often are determined to have zero financial need. So if you have a family that's making $150,000 a year, if they live somewhere like the Boston area, which is very expensive, they are going to look like, the formula is going to say they don't have any financial need. So they should be able to afford, $70,000 a year to send their child to college. But of course, that's not the case. Mm-hmm. So it's really created this problem where there's sort of the squeezing out of the middle class. And what I think we need to do, it's very, very complicated. Obviously, institutions need revenue to keep running and keep offering the programs that they're offering. So they are limited in the financial aid that they can allocate to families. But a lot of schools are sort of putting this cap in place where you don't get financial aid above your demonstrated need. And so then you have families with a lot of perceived need who are not getting enough financial aid. And one of the things that we work with schools to do is to sort of, obviously consider need, consider the formulas, but don't let that be the maximum. Don't put caps in place or decide that we're going to meet a certain percentage of everyone's need and that's how we're going to determine financial aid, because then again you get these middle class families who just can't afford it. So that is something I think it's a big problem in the country. I think it's sort of leading us in a bad direction, and I'm not an advocate by any means of sort of free college for all. I think that, and the data shows that college is an excellent investment, that the return on investment is higher than, anything else you'll invest in your life in terms of lifetime earnings potential with a college degree. So I'm not arguing that, families shouldn't make an investment in their kids' college education. I think that they certainly should, and there should be a cost to it because there's a cost to running the programs. It's just that the system, that the way it has developed, I think is a little bit broken. And we need to kind of think about ways to fix it.
Yeah. And I think that kind of brings us to the process change that needs to happen for a lot of institutions and say, one, obviously there's that crossroads of do you insource versus outsource. We've talked about the number of different ways it happens, and it seems there's a lot of lack of transparency in a lot of those processes, which is the biggest problem. But for an institution to take control over it, they need to have those skills internally to be able to do so. And that's a challenge for many institutions. And I'm reminded of an episode of our podcast. It was actually quite popular last season. We had Tej Matil from Enroll ML who had joined the podcast, where I've known Tej for years, and he was talking about he was talking about the need to kind of really rethink the way that we are hiring for admissions teams, and the key kind of thought process there for those who haven't listened to the episode, but we will put a link to that episode in the episode notes so you can stay in the FYI podcast ecosystem for a little bit. But the key message for him was 15 plus years ago, when we were hiring admissions counselors to recruit students, we were hiring for a specific type of personality, skill. These people needed to be outgoing. They needed to care about, reaching students in different places. And these are recruiters, right? They have to hit the road. They have to be okay. And now in many ways, we want to continue to hire for that aptitude, but the role we put these people in is one of sitting behind a screen, or in front of a screen rather, and looking at spreadsheets, right? And so that then that leads to burnout, and it leads to mass exodus of talent, and we're short staffed in a lot of ways because we're hiring people for the job that used to exist, and now there's a job that does exist, and there's still a place for those recruiters and road runners in a subset of our team, but you almost need an enrollment data analyst type person who's responsible for those things. And it feels like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like that's similar kind of boat that you're advocating for the development of enrollment teams for the future. Does that make sense?
Definitely. And I'll have to check out that podcast. I worked with Tej when he was at Northland. So that's, that sounds really
super small world of higher education. Look at that. All roads
really
lead to the
is.
FYI podcast.
Yeah. I think hiring people or recognizing people's talents in any job is very important. And I totally agree that, sorry, there was a little bit of an echo there. Schools, enrollment management offices have accepted the fact that being data-driven is crucial. But like you said, that doesn't mean taking every admissions counselor who may be hired because they have a great personality and they're outgoing and friendly and know about the school, and that's who you want talking to your students. They may not be a data person or a stats person. I do not write the blog for HAI. To do so would be torturous for me because I'm not creative and I don't write. And, we have a very talented creative writer who writes the blog. I can build the statistical models. So I think it is really important to recognize that. And, I've sort of had this internal debate over thinking, well, everyone should at least use the data in some way. Versus, let's not make these people think about the data. But I think there's sort of a middle ground there where you have an analyst, as you said, who can crunch the numbers and then help the admissions counselors use those to optimize.
Yeah, and it's easy to say that we understand that we need to be data driven, right? It's another thing to be educated enough and informed to know what data to actually use to inform decision making, right? And it's it's always that old adage of the difference between knowledge and wisdom, right? And so there's we can have all the data in the world, but if we don't know what to do with it, and we don't have someone on our staff that is able to ingest it, synthesize it, and present the numbers in a way that help leadership to inform decisions, then it's just a bunch of data, and we may as well just be going back to the old way of doing things because it's not helpful, right? And I don't think any reasonable person would say that we shouldn't use data at all to make decisions, but you need to know what data to use to make the right decisions. And so that's super insightful and super helpful when it comes to kind of rethinking the future of where admissions staffs kind of need to build towards and need to be. And I think there's something to be said about that crawl, walk, run approach that you said, where you work with a subject matter expert to build the model, and then work towards building a staff that's able to support that on their own with some insights and support.
Yeah, the other thing that we see a lot of is that schools have recognized the fact that they need to be data driven. And so they've collected a ton of data, and it's easier to do that now. And then they're kind of drowning in it. You don't know which factors should we be looking at and what should we be paying attention to. And so that's where having someone with a research background, a stats background is really helpful to kind of wade through that pool of data that everybody has now.
Yeah. And it sounds like that's something that most institutions might not have in this moment today, but the ability to bring on a firm that's less about, or bring on a partner that's less about, again, kind of building a plan that's just plugged in, but more so being collaborative and informing in that process is definitely a very, forward-thinking way of being, and a path that institutions should consider. So with that said, Emily, thank you for joining us on the podcast today. I would love for you to give our listeners an opportunity to get connected with you after they've listened today. What are the best ways to find you, find HAI, and to stay in touch?
So I'm on LinkedIn, and anyone can find me there. Our website is haianalytics.com, and I'm happy to have anyone email me. My email address is ecoleman@haianalytics.com. So I'd love to hear from folks.
Awesome. Well, Emily, thank you all. Thank you again for joining, and thank everyone for listening. And we will see you next time on FYI.
Okay.
Bye.